In this video, you will learn about finding the domain and range of finite graphs. Interval notation is used to represent a subset of numbers on the number line. It represents all the numbers between two numbers, and the type of interval we use depends on whether it includes the end value. So if it includes the number, we use a bracket, and if it does not include the number, we use a parentheses. This table further summarizes when to use each type of interval. Each type of bracket depends on the end of each graph. So if it includes a number indicating that it has a closed circle, we use a bracket. And if it does not include the number, which is an open circle, we use a parentheses. As we see in this example, when I write my interval, I say how it goes from left to right as far as it extends. So this one extends from 0 to 4. Hence why I have a 0 and a 4. And then the ending depends on what I have. So if I look at the 0, I have a closed circle, which indicates I use a bracket. So I have a bracket with the 0. And the 4 has an open circle, which indicates it's not included. So I use a parentheses, as we see here. If we look at each of these examples, it further reiterates that what we're noticing is that for each of these 4 examples here, they all include all the numbers from 0 to 4. However, what changes is the bracket types that we use. So for example, in the first one, we have an open circle to start it, hence why we use a parentheses. We also have an open circle to end this number, which is why I use a parentheses with that 4. An open circle to end with this 4, so I use parentheses here. Compared to when we have a closed circle, I use a bracket. Here I have a closed circle with a 0, so I use a bracket. And the 0 and the 4 both have a closed circle, so I use a bracket to indicate it includes the number. If I look at the first example, I can say this includes all numbers from 0 to 10. 0, 10. Then I fill in my bracket types. So on the left I have a closed circle, so I use a bracket. And on the right I have a closed circle, so I use a bracket. For the next example, I'm including all numbers from 0 to 9, so I have 0, 9. On the right side I have an open circle, so I use a parentheses. On the left side I have an open circle, so I use a parentheses. For the third example, I'm including all numbers from 1 to 8, so I have 1, 8. On the left side I have a closed circle, so I use a bracket. And on the right side I have an open circle, so I use a parentheses. In my final example, I'm including all numbers from -5 to 1, or -1. The left side has an open circle, so I use a parenthesis, and the right side has a closed circle, so I use a bracket. In this example, I do the same process, so I could say for the first part that I'm including all the numbers from -2 to 4, so I have -2, 4. The left side is a closed circle, so I use a bracket, and the right side is an open circle, so I use a parentheses. For the next example, I have all the numbers from -3 to 10. The right side is an open circle, so I use a parentheses. Or the left side is an open circle, so I use a parentheses. And the right side is an open circle, so I use a parentheses. For the next example, I have all the numbers from -1 to 8. The left side is an open circle, so I use parentheses. And the right side is a closed circle, so I use a bracket. In my last example, I'm including all the numbers from 0 to 8. The left side is a closed circle, so I use a bracket. And the right side is a closed circle, so I use bracket. Now, as a reminder, the domain is all the x values of a function. You can think of how far from the left to the right it extends. So when I think domain, I want to think left to right is how I read it. So if I were to look, the furthest to the left it extends is over to here, the -3, and the furthest to the right it goes is to this 1. So if I were to write this as an interval, I would say it was -3, 1. The -3 has a parentheses, since it's an open circle, and the 1 has a bracket, since it's a closed circle. The second example we'll get more into next time, where we have unrestricted or infinite domains. Now the range is all the y values of a function. You can think of it as how far the graph extends up and down. When we read domain or our range, we want to think of it as being the bottom to top. So for the first example, if I look the furthest down it goes, my furthest point is this -4, and since it's not obviously open, I assume it's closed. So I could say it goes from -4 with a bracket, and my highest point is either there's an open circle here or this point here, and again, since I have that closed point, it overrides the open circle. So as you could say, it goes from 0, -4 to 0. The second example has an infinite or unrestricted domain, which we'll talk more about in the next video. So in our first example here, I'm going to start by identifying domain, which if we remember domain, we read from left to right. So the furthest to the left it goes is this point right here, which is at -24. And since it's obviously an open circle, I'm going to use a parentheses. And the furthest to the right it goes is this point right here, which is also obviously an open circle, and it's at 0. I'm going to say this goes from -24 to 0 with a parentheses. For my range, I read from bottom to top. So the lowest possible point is right here, and it's obviously open at 0. To the highest possible point is right here, which is again an open circle at 12. So my range is from 0 to 12, and since they're both open circles, I use parentheses. For my second example, again, I'm reading domain is left to right. So for my domain, the furthest to the left it goes is right here at this point, which has an open circle at -16. Can use a parentheses. And the furthest to the right it goes is this point over here, which is going to become a closed circle at 16. So my domain continues to 16. Since it's a closed circle, I use a bracket. For my range, again, for range, I read from bottom to top. So the lowest point is this closed circle down here at -20. And use a bracket for -20. And the highest point goes to right here, which is an open circle. And since it's obviously open, I'm going to do a 20 and use a parentheses. For this example, for my domain, I'm going to read from left to right. So the furthest to the left it goes is this point right here. So I have an open circle at -4. And the furthest to the right it goes is this closed circle right here at 3. So I could say my domain goes from -4 to 3. It's an open circle at -4. So it's parentheses, and a closed circle at 3, so it's a bracket. My range, I read from bottom to top, so my lowest point is down here, and it's a closed circle at -3. To my highest point is right here, and since it's not obviously open, I'm going to assume it's closed. And this is at 4. So I say it's from -3 to 4, and since they're both closed circles, I use brackets. For my next example, the furthest to the left it goes is this point right here, which is at -5. And since it's obviously closed, I'm going to use a bracket. And the furthest to the right it goes is this point right here. So I put a closed circle at 4. So it'd be from -5 to 4. And then my range, the lowest possible point is this point right here, which is obviously closed. So I'm going to put a closed circle at -5, which is a bracket. And the highest point is up here, and since it's not obviously closed, obviously open, I assume it's closed. So this goes from -5 to 5. In this example, if I were to identify my domain, the furthest to the left it goes is this open circle right here at -4. So I can put a -4 with a parentheses with an open circle. And the furthest to the right goes is this open circle right here at 5. So it's -4, comma, 5 with a parentheses. For my range, the lowest possible point is this point right here at -3, which is a parentheses. And the highest point is right here, and since it's not obviously open, I assume it's closed, so it'll be -3 to 3. For my final example, for a domain, the furthest to the left it goes is this point right here, which is at -4, and the furthest to the right it goes at this point right here, which is 4. And since neither of them are obviously open, I'm going to assume they're closed and use brackets. For my range, my lowest possible point is down here at -3, and my highest possible point is up here at +3. And since they're not obviously open, I assume they're closed. So I'm going to say my range goes from -3 to 3.